Good afternoon and welcome to the next concurrent session of the day, Behind the Scenes, Discovering Business Statistics. Our presenters today are Kelsey Wiest and Robin Hendrix from Hawks Learning. If you have any questions for the presenter during the session, please feel free to enter those into the Q&A section at the bottom of the Zoom room screen, and we will address them at the end of the talk. On that note, I'll hand it over to our presenters.
Thank you so much, Kristen. As Kristen mentioned, my name is Kelsey Wiest. I'm a member of our Strategic Solutions and Learning Management team. I'm thrilled to be joined by Robin Hendrix, a senior math content editor on our content team and the lead editor on our brand new edition of Discovering Business Statistics. There's so many new and exciting updates to highlight in the new edition. So over the next 45 or so minutes, we'll be walking through a number of those highlights in a Q&A session, and then discussing a few details of what the transition process looks like to move to the new edition if you're currently using the first edition of this text. I'm planning to save some time at the end for additional questions. So if you have any throughout the discussion, like Kristen said, please feel free to chat those into the Q&A box, and we'll definitely have some time toward the end to get to those. And with that, I'll go ahead and get started. So Robin, I'd love if you could start with an overview of what all went into the revision process for this title.
Well, typically when we create a new edition of a textbook, our team will look at the comments and suggestions that we have from multiple sources, one being the author, instructors, students, and then we have internal feedback from our team members that we also incorporate. We collect all these ideas and suggestions. We talk about them. We might actually have to do a little bit of further research on some of the topics, especially new topics that people are suggesting that we include in the book. We'll do that, and then we sit down and make a list and prioritize the changes that we want to make in the new edition. Right now we've been working about 2 years on this edition, and along with the author to add new content that we've been requested, updating existing content, and we have done some modernization of and streamlining of our hypothesis testing chapters. We basically painstakingly reviewed all the examples, the current images, graphics that were in the previous edition, and we've updated these as we felt necessary. We've also added technology links to tech instructions on our STAT website, and we also have put data links in the textbook to large data sets that can also be found on our statistics website. The Discovering Technology sections that appear at the end of each chapter, these were expanded. We've added new topics for tech instructions, and we've also added a new technology, J&P, to that list. Basically, literally every page of the previous edition we've examined, we've looked at it, we've improved upon it. I do believe, as I hope everybody that has taught with this book before can see when they see the new edition.
Thanks, Robin. So I'm hoping now you could give us just a rundown of the new chapter that we introduced into this text, the second edition, and the sections that are included in the title, and really just explain why we chose to include some of these new topics.
Our new chapter for this edition is the time series chapter. This is something that some of our Discovering Business Statistics instructors have been asking for a few years. And so we started out with the basic topics of time series, looking at time series components, exponential smoothing, moving averages, seasonality, and we're going to hope that probably in later editions we'll expand upon this depending upon what instructors want to see. But at least we have the very basic components covered in this edition. Some of the other new lessons that we have for this edition is in chapter 2, we have a section on big data and business analytics. These are currently really hot topics that we really just touch on these in this edition, but we plan for expansion in the future. This section is just really an introduction to those topics, and it talks about, different types of big data, structured, unstructured, and semi-structured. We also have a new section in chapter 3 called Analyzing Graphs. This is really an important skill in today's world to be able to detect misleading information that is presented on graphs. We talk about graph scaling, data sources, reliable data sources, data transformations, and how graphs can be misleading either unintentionally or on purpose, depending upon, the purpose of the person who created the graphic. We also have a new section in 7.3 in chapter 7 that's assessing normality graphically. This introduces a new topic of using normal probability plots to validate the normality assumption of a data set. But we also include some of the previous topics that we had that talked about normality of data sets, which was histograms and box plots. So all three are incorporated in this section. We also added a section in chapter 9 on confidence intervals for estimating the population standard deviation or the variance. We actually had this content in the hypothesis testing chapter that corresponded with this, but we decided, since we've broken it out individually for means and proportions, to also break it out for the standard deviation and variance and put it in chapter 9. So that's what we did. This isn't really a new topic, but it's just a new location for this information. We also have a new section in chapter 11 on comparing two population variances. This talks about confidence intervals and hypothesis testing in the two population scenario. And this was requested, and I assume that it's probably requested to help in verifying the use of equal or unequal variances in testing the population mean, which is done previously in that chapter. We've added a really exciting new section on multiple comparison procedures. This is another section that's been asked, or this topic has been asked for quite a bit in previous feature requests of our stat products, and across the board for our stat products, this has been requested. So the multiple comparisons procedure section is a follow-up to a significant analysis of variance. It allows you to determine, after you've got a significant ANOVA, it allows you to determine which population means are actually different from one another. So this is a new test that people are going to be able to use once they complete an analysis of variance test. We also have a new section in chapter 13 on residual analysis. This is an expansion of our regression content to help to determine if we are using the correct model when you're doing the regression. This section actually looks at the regression assumptions of the independence of errors, equal variances, and whether the errors are normally distributed. So it will walk people through what the residual plots will look like for each of those cases where the assumption is verified and where it is not verified.
Great, thanks, Robin. A lot of new and expanded upon titles. That's really exciting to hear. So I assume a lot was carried over from the first edition in terms of the content that we still are maintaining in the second edition. Can you walk us through a few of the other major revisions made to the rest of the content that was carried over from the first to the second edition?
Yes, we've added about 40 new examples to this edition, along with the new content and some updated and expanded content. We've also updated about 70 examples to reflect new methodology, more current data sets, and an expansion of existing topics that were found in that were already found in the first edition. We've done quite a bit of work in chapters 10 and 11 with modernizing hypothesis testing. We'll discuss that a little bit later on its own. We've also placed more emphasis on using technology to solve problems in this edition. So you'll see next to the examples, you'll see either technology links that link you to how to go do this, to do the same solution or example using technology. And there'll be screenshots of that technology to show you how the results that you would typically get when you run that technology and you run it correctly, so that you can correlate those, the technology with the example solutions.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm hoping now you can share some of the ways that we placed a new renewed focus on business application integration, specifically in this new edition of this text.
Well, starting off, each chapter now has a Discovering the Real World chapter introduction. We had this for a few of the chapters in the previous edition, but now we have it for each of the 18 chapters in this book. These kind of serve as mini case studies that look at real world data sets or look at a business or a company in a way that introduces the concepts that are going to be discussed in the chapter. So I think everyone will find those very interesting. Chapter projects, we also had a smattering of chapter projects in the last book, last edition, but we now have a chapter project for each and every chapter of the book. The projects are basically a compilation of statistical exercises that could be asked about a particular data set or a business scenario that will reveal some interesting information and enable the researcher to make a good business decision based on the analysis that they're doing to complete the chapter project. We also have a lot of new and updated examples. As I said previously, we have about 40 new examples that were mostly created for the sections of the new content, but a few of these are based on content that was expanded upon, or we used a completely new data set in an existing example, maybe an updated data set, maybe one that we thought students or instructors would probably relate to a little bit better, or just more up-to-date information in those data sets. We also have expanded our exercise sets at the end of each section. We have over 100 new exercises that we have added. We expanded the exercise sets particularly for sections that have new content, but also for sections where new concepts were introduced or there was not a sufficient number of exercises, or at least we didn't feel there was from the first edition. One good example of this is in section 4.4 on data subsetting. We didn't have, I don't believe we had anything basic concept questions asked about that particular section, but now we have some actual real exercises added to that section in the new edition. We have almost 70 data sets that are ready to deploy to our STAT website for this DBS2 product, the Discovering Business Statistics second edition. So some of these are carryover from the previous edition, but I would estimate that we have maybe 25 to 30% of these data sets are going to be brand new data sets that instructors haven't seen.
That's really exciting. I know that's a big incorporation into a course like this, is the use of data. So sort of along the lines of things that are new, how was the incorporation of technology updated in this new edition?
Well, we expanded the current Discovering Technology sections at the end of each chapter with new topics for our existing technologies, Excel, Minitab, and the TI calculator, primarily focused on the 8384. But we also added a new technology to this book called JMP, which is a product of SAS. We found this is kind of an upcoming technology that a lot of people are using, and our author of this textbook is using this quite a bit in his courses. So we decided to incorporate that because he had a lot of existing examples to give us. We've integrated the technology links to the instructions for more direct guidance and easy access to technology instructions for these different technologies. So you'll see in the margin of the textbook, there's a technology link that will lead you to the STAT website that will actually link to these instructions to help students that if their instructors want them to do the examples or the exercises using technology, this will definitely be of a big benefit to them as opposed to doing things manually. Within Learn Specifically, students will be able to click on these same technology links that will then direct them to the tailored instructions for the specific topics.
Okay, so it seems like it's going to be a lot easier for students to get to any specific technologies they might need to reference for solving some of the questions included in the textbook, and then also in the software, which is really exciting.
Yes, from Learn, they'll be able to link directly over to the instructions. In the textbook, it's going to guide them to where they need to go on the STAT website.
Excellent, thank you. So I understand, like you mentioned previously, that we made some changes regarding how hypothesis testing is covered. Can you expand on this a little bit for us?
Let's see, for the hypothesis testing, we streamlined, first of all, we had 10 steps to hypothesis testing in the previous edition. It was a lot for students to remember, a lot for me to remember. So we've decided to streamline that down to 6. And I think that we did a great job of combining some of these to come up with only 6 steps in the hypothesis testing procedure. The null hypothesis is now written using only an equal sign instead of using the mathematical opposite of the alternative hypothesis. This is what a lot of authors are doing right now. And a lot of people who are using, statistics have kind of what they call modernized it to only use the equal and the null hypothesis. I do think this makes it easier for students. They don't have to, they just could concentrate on the alternative hypothesis and what inequality sign needs to be in that one instead of focusing on both hypotheses. So I think it takes a little bit of the pressure off the students to figure out what the hypothesis testing setup is. We've also done most of our examples with including both rejection regions and p-values are used to make the decision for the hypothesis test, so that it allows instructors, if they like one way versus the other, to go whatever route that they would like to choose in this book. The change is intended to help to make the concept easier for students to understand and align it with current market standards for this topic in other statistical textbooks.
Okay, that's good to know. And my understanding is this is very similar to how this topic is covered in some of our other statistics titles. I will say, just as a note for those of you who are attending and using the first edition, if you do have specific thoughts on preferring the old methodology to what we've updated to, please just definitely communicate that with us. We certainly want to work to make sure that we're meeting the need and we have ways to accommodate that. So I certainly hope that that wouldn't be a deterrent. We can absolutely accommodate you, but like Robin said, the hope is that this change will really help to make the concept easier for students to understand. So moving on, I'm hoping that you can now elaborate really just your thoughts on how this new edition of this book is relevant and impactful for students and instructors.
Well, for instructors, we've made a lot of improvements to these editions that we hope will provide better support for instruction in their courses. We've added highly requested topics, made significant updates to content that carried over from the first edition, and we placed a renewed focus on business application integration to ensure the content is very relevant for business students. We've also updated and expanded all the extra instructor materials like the PowerPoints, chapter projects, new data sets, and technology instructions. For students, we think this edition is really going to be much more approachable and engaging for them, and I think it will help to make better connections between the statistical topics that are taught and their future careers in the business world.
So really making those connections for students and how a lot of this content is going to apply for them, which is a great thing for students in a business statistics course. We talked briefly about the expanded exercise sets. Can you expand on that a bit, and in particular, the focus on application within those sets? And this would be in the textbook specifically.
Well, we've always had a breakdown of the exercises into two categories: basic concepts and exercises. The basic concepts are those that kind of give students a more conceptual understanding of the topics that are being taught. And you'll find these at the end of each section. We have a smattering of both now, but typically there's 3 to 4 basic concept questions and maybe 5 to 10 exercises at the end of each section, or more, as in the case of some others. These are great options to consider incorporating into your class discussions. The basic concept questions are, and they're largely free response and open-ended. So this may lead to some very active classroom discussion. So that's what the basic concept questions are really typically put in there for, to start a conversation or to get students thinking about the whole concept of what they're learning. The exercises are almost entirely, there are a couple of skill-based things in there, but pretty much for statistics, these are all application-based questions. And these will present the instructor and the students with ample additional opportunities to connect the content in the lesson to the business world.
Excellent. So a lot of the updates we've talked about so far have been within the textbook. I know there was also an emphasis placed on adding new questions to the online question bank. So what will these new questions bring to students and instructors?
Well, we have added over 300 questions to the online question bank and over 100 questions to the textbook. In addition, the default curriculum has been updated so that out of the box, each lesson will accurately assess whether students have mastered the concepts from the lesson. As usual, every question comes with tutor components that help students during practice, error-specific feedback, hints, step-by-step, walkthroughs, and completely worked out solutions.
So that's a lot of new content, 300 new questions. That's really exciting to hear. Just to expand a bit for those of you who aren't as familiar with our default curriculum, what Robin mentioned, this is allowing you to get started with any of our lessons. And it sounds like the questions that are included in our default, which are ready to use, have been tweaked and customized so that it's even more appropriate for as far as the coverage goes for each of the lessons that you might want to assign in this text. Am I understanding that correctly, Robin? That we've tweaked some of those defaults to make it even more representative of what instructors what we think they might want to cover within the lessons.
Oh yes, we've gone through each of the lessons very tediously and decided exactly which questions we wanted to include. You know, we've written a lot of new QB questions that we put in all of the lessons, And of course, you'll find those in the default curriculum. We've modernized a few things, changed the scenarios to be more businessy. So I think instructors will see a big difference in the question bank for this book.
Lots of new questions. That's very exciting. So one of the other resources that we expanded upon that's really exciting in the second edition are the expansions we made to the chapter discovery projects. Can you tell us a little bit more about what these are and how they can be used? I know you touched on them earlier.
Yes, in the previous edition, we had just a few projects in there that instructors could have used for either like a capstone project or maybe a group project. But now we have a project in there for every chapter. In some cases, the chapter project connects back to the Discovering the Real World introduction. We tried to do that whenever we could, but they can be used as individual projects, to have students turn in either for makeup work or for an application type or presentation in class, or they could be used as group projects that they could be completed either inside or outside the classroom. Now I have a favorite one, and it happens to be in chapter 1, which was we actually worked through the entire book and then came back and did chapter 1 as the last chapter that we updated. So we'd have very current information in it. And my favorite project is in chapter 1. It is about, and it shows a graphic about the Standard & Poor's 500 companies and the effects on their profitability in the last couple of years during COVID-19. So I think everybody will find that very interesting, and there's lots of interesting stories and information in that graphic.
Yeah, really relevant too. So wrapping up, I would love to just hear what your favorite chapter and lesson is in the new edition, just to give us a sneak peek of what you like the most, or what you've liked updating the most, and why.
Well, my favorite chapter is probably the time series chapter, because as a team, we put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into this one. This one took a lot of work from everybody to get this chapter out. And I know it's just the basics, but we did go over this with a fine-tooth comb to make sure this was correct. And, to give people some options here for how to teach time series. I'm also glad that we finally had the chance to create the multiple comparison material for the analysis of variance in section 12.4. This has been sorely needed in our statistical repertoire for a while, and it's been requested a lot. So I'm just glad we finally were able to get that section out there for instructors and students.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And I do just want to make one clarification. We talked, I know this is going to be something of particular interest to a lot of attendees here, so I want to clarify that with all of the new questions that we added to the online question bank, that was 300 that have been added to each, not necessarily all of the lessons, but across the product. Those are all multi-iteration. Typically, we have anywhere from 30 to 50 iterations, depending on the appropriateness of the different versions generated within the question. So it really does offer a ton of variety as far as being able to use these questions in the lessons and then testing students on them in any tests or quizzes you create using WebTest. I think that variety is really important to keep in mind when you're thinking about the new content we released to the online platform specifically. So thank you again, Robin. I really appreciate you sharing all of the exciting updates and valuable information. Before we move into some Q&A time, and as a reminder, if you do have any questions for Robin about this new edition that you'd like us to expand on or that we didn't cover, please feel free to chat those in the Q&A box and we can cover them at the end. I see we'll have quite a bit of time for questions, so I'm excited to get to some of those. But before we do that, I just wanted to share a few brief reminders about the process to transition to the new edition. So first, although it isn't, if you're using our first edition of the textbook, although it isn't required to transition to the new edition in the upcoming fall semester, we do hope that some of these updates and enhancements that we walked through and that you'll see as you're reviewing the material are exciting and encouraging you to make the switch. As a reminder and recap of the resources that we offer in this new edition of Discovering Business Statistics, we do offer our comprehensive online courseware platform that comes with those pre-created but customizable lessons that walk students through the content of your course and then also hold them accountable for mastering the material. we offer an updated printed textbook. We expect to be able to ship printed review copies of this textbook out very soon, but if you're interested in taking a look now, you can review the textbook virtually by accessing it through VitalSource, and you can connect with your training representative with instructions if you need any information on how to access that. And then, like Robin had mentioned earlier, we do have a companion website available with additional resources, things like technology instructions for various technologies. And again, in the learn mode of our online platform, students can link to these technology instructions directly, although they can go and access them from the companion website. We have data sets that have been updated and modernized, those chapter projects that Robin mentioned, which have been expanded upon and updated. So a lot of really new and exciting updates in this new edition. So switching gears, we often get questions about what the process is to upgrade to the new edition. So I want to make sure to cover just a few details about it. First, we make the process really seamless and easy by automatically copying over almost all faculty settings and assignments from the old edition to the new edition. We can transition you over really quickly, and your training specialist can take the lead on this for you to get it done. As I mentioned, we can copy over nearly everything so that it really reduces any extra setup you have on your end. These copied items include things like instructors, your sections, custom permission settings, your assignments and content, such as your custom curricula, any tests and quizzes you've created using WebTest, offline assignments, course materials you've customized, any custom question builder questions you've created yourself. We do also copy over all of your custom grade settings like grading options, your specific assignment groups, lesson and test late penalties, and we copy over a lot of other custom settings like what you've defined as your letter grade, your managed temporary access code settings, any custom display options you have set in your gradebook, and assignment reminder templates you've set up and used in the past. So with all of these items, we're able to copy over for you. That really just leaves further customizing your existing lessons and tests to add in any new content you want to include, and then setting up a brand new lesson due date template. So once you've done those few things, you should be all set and ready to go within the new course. We offer as much help and support as we can to make it a really easy process. And even before we complete the copying process from your old to the new edition, right now, we can add a preview of this course, the new edition of this course, to your Teach account so that you can begin reviewing it and planning your new course. If it isn't already there, for some of you, it might already be available as a preview in your Teach account. So this really would be an incredible time to look at some of the new content that's going to be available for you to assign virtually and determine if you plan to add it to your existing web tests and lessons. As far as what the process looks like for your students, the first step would be to let your support specialist know that you'd like to transition to the new edition so that we can ensure we have the information we need to determine when to seamlessly transition your students over to the new edition. Typically, that's done between terms. So you might be using the older edition in the summer, and then we'd seamlessly transition as soon as summer classes end into the new edition for the fall. If you have any repeater students, they don't need to create new accounts. Instead, they'll have access to an upgrade button in their student portal that will allow them to automatically upgrade to the new edition and enroll in the new course. And even if your students do upgrade, you still have access to your old gradebook, so not to worry there. And this would include access to any archives you've created so that you can still access that old archived data. Before that transition is complete, one tip we have is that you'll just need to make sure you do actually archive your old gradebook so that you can preserve those old sections and grades to review if you ever need access to them in the future. And lastly, before we move on to some additional Q&A time, if you'd like to go ahead and get started with the process to upgrade to the new edition of this book, just reach out to your training and support specialist, and they can get you started by giving you that preview access to the new edition in your Teach account if you don't already have access to it, and then discuss when we can begin the process of copying over your old sections, settings, and assignments to the new edition. The support team is equipped to address any questions that you have throughout the transition. And again, it's seamless and easy, and we're happy to help however we can. So it does look like we have a good bit of time left for questions. So let's take a few minutes and answer any additional questions you might have.
Yeah, it looks like there are a few in the Q&A box here. One question is, how have the questions within the software changed? I think you all talked a little bit about that. If there's anything more you'd like to expand on, or Brandon, if you have any further questions to better clarify exactly what you're looking to hear more about, feel free to add those into the Q&A box, but I'll pass it over to Kelsey and Robin.
Yeah, Robin, anything to add as far as how the virtual question bank might have changed? I know a lot was carried over from the old edition because it was still relevant to the topics that we were covering in the new edition. And that a lot of the new, as far as I understand, a lot of the new content we added to the virtual question bank, correct me if I'm wrong, is all business focused or primarily business focused. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, all the new questions that we've written for this title or this edition have definitely had a much better business focus, and we've changed some of the scenarios in the previous book to make them more businessy. And you'll see that what they'll see also is that there's going to be more of a match between the exercises in the textbook and some of the questions that they're going to be seeing in the question bank. So we've tried to create some new QB questions directly from those exercises so that they'll resemble exactly what they're seeing in the textbook.
Great,
So,
thank you.
Hopefully that answers the question, Brandon. If not, please feel free to chat in another question. We'd be happy to expand.
Here's another one. Are there any mathematical analysis in the book, or since it is for business, is the entire book descriptively written?
No, I would say this book, I mean, there are a couple sections like the one we talked about on big data, and maybe a couple of others that are really more conceptual and just talk about describing certain concepts. But for the most part, almost every section in this book, I would say, has some mathematical content where there's an analysis being done, requires some kind of statistical analysis, interpretation, conclusion, and some results presented. So I would say that by far it's probably mostly more analysis than it is descriptive.
Thank you. Here's another question. Is the actual version, will the actual version be kept working in parallel to the new version? I assume you're asking, can you use the old version while the new version is available? Could you wait maybe a semester or two on upgrading to the new?
That's a great question. So we really don't, especially for this first year as we're releasing it, we don't touch the current edition. So if you're planning to continue using that edition for a semester or two, but want to start planning and preparing your updated assignments in the new edition, you can have those both on your Teach dashboard simultaneously. It's just that we would prevent the new edition from showing up to your students and from your students being able to purchase until you're ready to actually make that change. I would say it's beneficial to be strategic with when you determine to copy, when you want to copy over everything from the old edition to the new edition, so that you're working from your most updated assignments when you copy them over to the preview of the new edition. That way, when you're making any tweaks and modifications to them, adding in new content or expanding on them in any way, you're working with what you had done most recently in the older edition. But it's really up to you how you want to handle that. And you definitely can have the two on your Teach dashboard in parallel and be working to prepare the new edition for when you're ready to start using it and still teach out of the older edition. Hopefully that answers the question.
Is there any additional cost for the students to upgrade to the new edition?
So my understanding for students who've already purchased the old edition is that there isn't a cost to upgrade to the new edition. I don't know that we've finalized our pricing for brand new students, but those students would have to purchase the materials new anyways. But if your student is upgrading from the old edition to the new edition because they're repeating or they withdrew and need to re-enroll, they should be able to use that upgrade button to upgrade to the new edition for free.
Thank you. When will the new edition be available to review?
Yeah, that's a good one. So I kind of touched on this throughout our presentation. It's available now to review on VitalSource. If you're not familiar with VitalSource, hopefully everyone is, but it's a virtual platform where you can access a library of textbooks. So you can actually access the instructor version of this text on VitalSource right now. And we should be receiving printed texts back any day now for us to be able to ship out physical copies for you to take a look at. So if you're interested in receiving a printed text to look at, just let your training and support specialist know. And as soon as they become available to ship, we'll make sure to get a copy out to you. And like I mentioned, we do already have the new edition of the instructor courseware available. So if you'd like to start reviewing some of the new content, the virtual content that's already been released to the portal, we can actually add the new edition as a preview to your Teach gradebook. We won't be able to do any of the copy over, so the copy from old to new edition just yet. We expect that might be able to happen sometime closer to the summer term. But again, we can keep you updated on that. And you can start reviewing what's been released to the new edition virtually now. So if you'd like to do either of these things, review via VitalSource, have it added to your Teach account as a preview, and receive a physical copy of the textbook, just get in touch with your training representative and they can definitely get all of the information out to you.
Thank you. Will there be any other ancillaries available within this new edition?
So I know Robin touched on this a bit when she was talking about the companion website. And my understanding is that we've done some additional work on our PowerPoint teaching slides. Do you want to just recap a bit, Robin, of what ancillaries we have?
Yes, the PowerPoints have been started. Actually, they're more than started. We're almost finished with them and we've just started proofing them. So we'll have PowerPoints for instructors and students. We have the STAT website that'll have technology instructions. We will have the chapter projects in instructor resources. And I guess they'll also be on the student side, but we'll have the answers in the instructor resources. And then we'll also have, all the data sets that we're putting out there on the STAT website for students and instructors to access.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to see if there were any other questions that came through.
Well, I just had a question for Robin. Another favorite question. Do you have a favorite chapter project in this new edition, Robin?
The chapter project is the one that I was talking about earlier about chapter 1. I do like the graphic that's there on the Standard & Poor's 500. And like I said, as I was reviewing some of the data on that, because it's got, lots of different companies and how they fared 1 year versus the next year. Looking at those, there were some interesting stories and things that I kind of Googled and researched and found out about. So it's an interesting graphic and it's an interesting project. It's kind of a very simple project in that we don't ask a lot of questions, but for those people who are interested, they start digging into some of the other companies that aren't really mentioned in the project itself. You'll find a lot of interesting things going on, and things that they did to combat the effects of COVID-19. So, like I said, it's one of my favorites.
Lots to look forward to. Well, thank you. Is there anything else you would like to share here while we're all together?
If anybody looks over the book and they have some suggestions, we're always looking for what to do next in the next edition. So, send your feature requests in. Let us know what you like about the book, what you don't like. And, we try to look at all that feedback when we do the next edition here in a couple of years.
Yeah, we'll be excited to hear your feedback as you start reviewing it. The only other thing that I would mention is that since we are wrapping up just a few minutes early, if you aren't as familiar with the courseware component, I'm not sure who we have here with us, if you're current Hawks users or if you're considering using Hawks, specifically this new edition. But if you'd like to take a closer look at the student platform and what the student experience looks like, get an overview of our mastery-based lessons, I would highly recommend stopping by our booth. They're doing demonstrations of the courseware all day today, and you have an opportunity to win prizes, and it gives you a really great context for some of what we talked about and how your students would be able to use and apply the content in the lessons.
Yes, definitely. Well, thank you both for all the valuable information you've shared with us today. As Kelsey mentioned, if you have any remaining questions or you'd like to see a demonstration of the student courseware, please feel free to stop by the Hawks virtual booth to speak with a member of our Hawks team. The next concurrent sessions will begin at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You can view the chat for session meeting room links or access the conference website for a complete list of concurrent sessions and their descriptions. While accessing the conference website, don't forget to swing by the exhibit hall to say hello to the Hawks team. You can view that 5-minute quick